guys. We're about 2 weeks into February, so like 6 weeks into the year. And if you're anything like me, this is the time of year when you read the most. I always read the most in January, and I feel like some people that also read the most in January do it because they make New Year's resolutions, and that's when they're the most consistent with it. But I think a lot of my reasoning for reading the most in January, and just the beginning of the year in general, is because I am home more. That's really all it is. We've had like 2 full weeks of snow days, basically. And then also the first week of January was still winter break. So when I'm home that much, there's only so many things to do, and reading is one of them. We are 6 weeks into the year. I've read 12 books so far, and I'm reading my 13th now, and there's nothing else really happening in my life that I could make a video out of, so I'm going to take you through the first dozen books I read in 2025. So I keep track of my reading log in 2 different places. I do use Goodreads, but I also just keep something in my notes app. Goodreads, I'm really annoyed that it's a 5-star rating and you can't do half stars. I like getting more specific than that with my ratings. So whenever I write it down in my notes app, I do a 10-star rating, and I make the rules. If I want to go above 10 stars, I will. But also, I like getting more specific than even just the 10 separate stars. So if I want to do 8.37, I can. I literally just do extra half-star ratings if I feel like it. But I make the rules, so I can really do whatever I want when it's just in my notes app. To start out the year, I actually finished a book from last year, because last November, I started reading Beautiful Boy, and I just couldn't get into it all the way. So I put it down. I read the Hunger Games series again, and then I picked it back up after Christmas and finished that right at the start of the new year. I had already seen the movie. I didn't even know it was a book. And then I was at the thrift store one day and I was like, oh my gosh, I watched that movie and I was uncertain of my opinion on it. Maybe if I read the book, I'll feel more certain. And that's what happened. Now I do need to read the other book that helped make the movie, but I've got one done and I gave it 9 stars. It took a while. I might have been too generous with 9 stars. I think I was just so filled with the emotions from the book that it encouraged me to rate it at a higher ranking than maybe I would have if I had less attachment to the book at that point. Because when you've been reading a book for like 2 months, you kind of grow attached to it, and sometimes it makes you hate the book and sometimes it makes you love the book. And this time I think it made me love the book. Up next, during our mini snow days, I read The Yellow Wallpaper. With old books like this, there are so many archives online that I just looked it up. It's just like a bunch of PDFs that archives have of it. And I really don't have a lot to say about this. Apparently neither did the author, because it was only 80 pages. But I did give it a solid 6 out of 10 star rating, which sounds kind of low, but like that's 3 out of 5 stars if you think about it. So I feel like that's a good rating for a little book like this. It did seem right up my alley, so I'm not surprised that I enjoyed it. But because it's right up my alley, I've read better books with similar storylines. So that's kind of what urged me to make it a 6 stars rating. Up next was another old book that was easy to just find an archived version of, and that is Fahrenheit 451. I started reading that in the fall semester, got maybe a page in. Then I was like, no, I'm just returning this to the library because I don't have the energy. One, just because it is not a fluffy writing style. It's very to the point, but there are still so many layers to it. So if I were to read it then, I would have just been reading it to the point, this is a story. But because I waited to read it until I was home all day and I could just spend all day reading it, I could kind of dive into more of the themes rather than just reading the story. And I gave it 7 out of 10 stars. Okay, then I started getting desperate because it was like day number 4 and they just kept calling off school. And I was very happy to not be spending all day at school, but I needed more things to fill my time with. So I went to my grandparents' house and I borrowed what I didn't already have of the Harry Potter series, and that's what I started next. I had already read them back in like 5th grade, I guess. 5th and 6th grade. I don't really remember what year I read them. But the first couple of books were really making me nostalgic for that time. Later books, I felt like I was rediscovering them rather than remembering what it was like to read it for the first time. Because obviously there's more depth to the later books. That's why she made them like hundreds of pages longer than the early year books. But that kind of helped me to get through the rereading process. It didn't feel like I was just rereading. It kind of felt like I was reading it for the first time again. Obviously I knew the story and I knew the plot twists, but there was layers to it that I wasn't picking up the first time, because how could I have? I started with the first one. I gave it 9.5 out of 10 stars. And the second one, I gave 9.5 out of 10 stars. Then I had to pump the brakes because I had an annual reread that I needed to get to, and that was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I really, really love this story. I really, really love the film. I really, really love that I have it in my collection now, because I was just checking this out each year when I was rereading it. But now I have something tangible to put on my shelf to represent my love for this story. This is such an easy one to reread because the length of it and the story of it. With a book like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, a story like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, each time I read it, I relate to a different character. I relate to different aspects of it, and I find new things about it. As I grow up, it feels like a different book each time because it's doing different things for me each time I reread it. I think the past couple of years, it's kept up its 10-star rating. So that says a lot about me and my connection to this book, I think. Then I went back to Harry Potter. Prisoner of Azkaban, I gave 8 stars. The Goblet of Fire, I gave 9 stars. Just keep in mind that with all of these, the ratings are my ratings, not yours. And also, they change each time I read them. Sometimes I'm gonna connect more with The Prisoner of Azkaban, sometimes I'm not. That's just how it works whenever you reread things. Picking back up at The Order of the Phoenix, I gave it 8 stars. The Half-Blood Prince, which I loved way more than I remembered loving. I always liked this book, but it's moving up my rating scale of the books, if you know what I mean. Whenever I reread it, I remember how many important things were introduced in this book, and that kind of reminded me of how good it actually is, even though it seems kind of lackluster right behind the grand finale that is The Deathly Hallows, which I gave 9 stars. Most of these books I was swinging through in 3 days' time. The Deathly Hallows took me a solid week. So I'm not surprised that it wasn't a 10-star rating. I will say that because of this reread, I don't think I will ever be able to listen to Lizzy McAlpine's Older without thinking of Harry Potter, because it just felt so right with the vibes. I kept putting it on to listen to while I was reading the Harry Potter books, and now I think it's just always going to remind me a little bit of the time I reread the Harry Potter books. If you've been counting, you would know that is not 12 books, because I finally read My Year of Rest and Relaxation. It's interesting. Very interesting. I just finished it today, so it's hard to give you like full thought out or review of it, so I don't really think I'm going to try. Just know that I gave it 7 out of 10 stars, and I'll just leave it there. My reading process for it was interesting as well, and then the book itself, well, I have a copy of it, so I'll be rereading it sometime. And maybe my rating will change whenever I reread it. Unfortunately, there's not much more to say. So I'm not going to draw it out anymore because I've literally just been doing nothing to do with anything. Those were the books I've read so far this year. And that's all this video was. So I'll see you guys in 2 weeks with a new video. And maybe there's a hint in this video about what that video will be.